The 5-day battle in Lincoln served as the climatic end to the Lincoln County War. With McSween and Tunstall dead, and Dolan and Riley in financial ruin, there was little left to fight for. Thus began a new chapter in the life of Billy the Kid, one that history would title The Outlaw Years. During his tape-recorded interviews with William V. Morrison, Roberts was able to recall many intimate details of this period in the life of Billy the Kid. Some of this information was so detailed that it could only have been derived from personal experience. In this episode, we will continue examining Roberts' statements, taken directly from his tape-recorded interviews with William V. Morrison. The interviews between Morrison and Roberts took place on June 16, 1949 at Hamilton, Texas, June 17, 1949 at Hyco, Texas, and August 18, 1949 at Lincoln and Carrizozo, New Mexico. Like my previous video on the Lincoln County War, portions of these interviews originally appeared in the following books: Alias Billy the Kid by William V. Morrison and C.L. Sonnichsen, The Return of the Outlaw Billy the Kid by W.C. Jameson and Frederick Bean, The Real Billy the Kid, aka Brushy Bill Roberts, by me, Brett L. Hall, Billy the Kid, The Lost Interviews by W.C. Jameson, and Billy the Kid Beyond the Grave, also by W.C. Jameson. I will also compare Roberts' statements with the events depicted in the book The Saga of Billy the Kid by Walter Noble Burns to show that the new theory adopted by neo-historians and those that support maintaining the historical status quo, that Roberts obtained his knowledge of Billy the Kid by memorizing the Burns book, is completely unfounded and not based on facts. Please note that the original version of this video was not broken down into multiple parts, but had a running time of over 2 hours, so I decided that it would be better served to break it down into 4 parts. In Part 1, I will cover the period immediately following the end of the Lincoln County War, which most researchers agree ended on July 19, 1878, with the death of Alexander McSween and Billy and others making their daring escape from McSween's burning home. I will begin with the killing of Indian Agency clerk Morris Bernstein, who was killed on August 5, 1878, and some have incorrectly credited Billy with this murder. I will then discuss the peace agreement between Billy and Dolan's men, and finally Billy's meeting and subsequent pardon agreement with Governor Lew Wallace. With that said, let us examine Roberts' statements and see if they can be verified by sources. Quote, "I didn't kill that Indian agent. I had nothing to do with it. I got blamed for it, of course. I got blamed for everything that no one else wanted. We were up there, but we did not go to steal horses like they said we did. No, sir." End quote. In the Saga of Billy the Kid, Walter Noble Burns writes, quote, "Billy the Kid added to his list of killings on August 5th during a horse-stealing raid on the Mescalero Apache Reservation. Joe Bernstein, Indian Agency clerk, saw the outlaws rounding up some horses not far from Blazer's sawmill, scene of the Buckshot Roberts fight. Supposing them to be cowboys laboring under a mistaken idea of ownership, he rode out to them. 'Hey,' he shouted, 'what are you fellows about? Don't drive those horses off. They belong on this range.' His blunder cost him his life. Without stopping to argue the matter, Billy the Kid shot him. The horses didn't belong to him," the kid explained afterward, "and it takes a bullet to teach some people to keep their noses out of other men's business. He was only a Jew anyway." End quote. Roberts and Burns' accounts are completely different, and Roberts' claim that he didn't kill Bernstein is backed up by the following sources. According to Billy's friend and former Lincoln County regulator George Coe, in his book Frontier Fighter, Coe states, quote, "One day the kid said to me, 'George, we have to go over there and see what they did with poor old Dick. You need a change from your hand nursing, so we'll just make you captain of the guard.' There were only 3 or 4 of us left in camp at that time, and Billy realized this was not a sufficient number to break in on a suspecting community. He went down and rounded up 6 or 8 Mexicans, who with Henry Brown, Billy, and myself made up the party. We pulled out for the Indian Agency. About a mile from our destination, the road ran up the hill through thick timber. There was a spring of clear water on the opposite side of the open canyon. I insisted that we ride over to get a drink and dampen the claws on my wounded hand. The Mexicans did not seem inclined to go, so I told them to remain where they were while the kid, Henry Brown, and I went to the spring. Billy jumped off his horse and was in the act of taking a drink. Henry and I were still mounted when we heard a fusillade of shots from our Mexicans. It sounded as though a battle was in progress. The noise frightened Billy's bronc, and jerking loose, he ran off towards the agency. Billy jumped up behind me, and we started at a dead run back to our crowd. Suddenly, the shooting began again. Bullets whizzed by us like hailstones. We lay flat against the side of our horse and fairly flew until we reached the Mexicans. "What's all this shooting about?" I yelled. 5 men rode up to the top of the bank, they answered excitedly. We told them to halt, but they whirled their horses around and began shooting at us. We fired in return and killed one of the 5. The remaining 4 had discovered us at the spring and fired at us until we reached the protecting shadow of the timber. This was another narrow escape for the kid and me. The cantle of my saddle was shot all to pieces, while Billy, lying flat behind me on the horse, escaped injury. Brown's horse was so badly wounded we had to shoot it. We had no idea whom our Mexicans had killed, but after investigation we learned that it was Bernstein, a clerk at the Indian Agency. It is a matter of record that the kid was accused of this killing, tried for the offense, and acquitted. Several writers have attributed this murder to him as one of the most blood-curdling crimes of his career. Since I was present at the time, I can testify that he had nothing to do with it." End quote. It should be noted that Coe wasn't present when Billy was indicted in Lincoln or his subsequent trials in Mesilla following the change of venue motion granted by the court. Therefore, he was unaware of the fact that Billy was never tried for the murder of Bernstein. This is important because William Henry Roberts didn't make this mistake when he recounted his legal proceedings in Lincoln and Mesilla. Of the 3 accounts between Roberts, Coe, and Burns, Roberts was the most accurate. We will examine this in greater detail in Part 3 of this chapter. In the book Billy the Kid, His Life and Legend by John Tusca, Tusca writes that the Mexican party was led by Constable Antonacio Martinez, who was in pursuit of Frank Wheeler and his San Nicolas Spring rustlers, who had stolen half of Tunstall's cattle, whose estate was being administered by Susan McSween, who had sent Martinez and his men to repossess the herd. On the way, Martinez and his men met with Billy and his friends and convinced them not to go to Blazer's Mill as it wasn't safe and assured them that he and his men would see to Brewer's grave when they passed through. It was right after this meeting that the incident occurred between the Mexicans and Bernstein. Tusca cites a Cimarron News and Press article dated September 19, 1878, which supports Roberts and Coe's statements regarding the kid's innocence in the Bernstein shooting. The article states, quote, "It is positively asserted, the account stated, that Bernstein was killed by a Mexican who was with a party going from San Patricio to Tularosa to assist in recovering a lot of stolen stock in the possession of Frank Wheeler and others. When the Mexicans reached the water alongside of the road above the agency, they stopped to water their horses. Bernstein saw them and, probably supposing them to be a party of the regulators, attacked them with a party of Indians. He rode up on one Mexican and fired 2 shots at him. The man took shelter behind a tree. Bernstein, still advancing, rode close to the tree and fired again at the man, who returned the fire and killed Bernstein. The Mexican says he acted strictly in self-defense and will at any time deliver himself up for trial. His name is Antonacio Martinez." End quote. Once again, Burns is wrong and Roberts is right. Quote, "About this time, the president removed the governor from office in Santa Fe. He sent General Lew Wallace to take over as governor of the territory. Mrs. McSween and John Chisholm talked with the governor about conditions in the country. It looked like things would straighten out. The governor issued a proclamation of amnesty to most of the people who had fought in the war. It did not apply to me. I already had indictments against me for the murder of Brady and Hindman. But I didn't kill them. I didn't. I wasn't even shooting at them. I was shooting at Billy Matthews. How could I kill them? Most of that fall and winter we stayed around Fort Sumner and Portales. In the winter of '79, we got together with Dolan and Evans and agreed to stop fighting each other. When we came out of the saloon that night in Lincoln, we run into Chapman, the lawyer for Mrs. McSween. Campbell and Dolan killed him in cold blood. I was standing there with them and saw who killed him. I heard that Governor Wallace had offered $1,000 for me if I would come in and testify. I wrote and told him that I would come in if he would annul those indictments against me. He wrote back that he would meet me at Squire Wilson's house in Lincoln, the house out there by the tower. I tied my horse up while Tom watched and went up to the back door. The governor and Wilson were alone in the house. I went in and talked for several hours. I explained that Tom and I had seen them shoot Chapman in cold-blooded murder. He wanted us to testify before the grand jury and tell them what we knew. Also, he wanted me to testify against Colonel Dudley in his court-martial trial at Stanton. I told him about things in general in this country and what started the trouble. I was not afraid to talk like the rest of them. I had the guts to help the governor out. No one else would say enough to help him. This happened one night in March. We didn't meet like they say we did in the daytime at Patron's. I had only this one meeting with Wallace until I submitted to arrest. The governor did come there after Tom and I were arrested. We were kept at Patron's that time, I think. He promised to pardon me if I would stand trial on my indictments in the district court in Lincoln, testify before the grand jury in the Chapman case, and testify against Dudley. I promised to do it, and Tom and I left for San Patricio where he lived with me. General Wallace sent Sheriff Kimbrell to San Patricio to pick us up. He let me pick the men to arrest me. Tom and I went to Lincoln with them and went to jail. When my case was called, Judge Leonard was not there like the governor said he would be, so the court appointed Colonel Fountain to represent me. I pled not guilty to the indictments. Then we went before the grand jury that brought in the indictment against Dolan and his men for the murder of Chapman. I testified at the Dudley trial in Stanton. Then they wanted to take me to Mesilla for trial on my indictments. I had promised the governor that I would stand trial in Lincoln and not any place else, to which he agreed. It began to look now like the governor could not do like he wanted. The judge, Warren Bristol, was a Murphy sympathizer and a friend of Tom Catron, at the head of the Santa Fe ring. I saw that they did not intend to treat me right. I went to Kimbrell and told him to give me my scabbards and six-shooters. He told me he didn't blame me, as it looked like I was being taken for a ride. So I did ride, but not to Mesilla. Tom and I walked out of the jail. We rode back to Fort Sumner, and I told them that if they wanted us, to come and get us, but come a-shootin'." End quote. President Rutherford B. Hayes removed Governor Samuel B. Axtell from office and appointed General Lew Wallace to succeed him on September 4, 1878. On November 15, 1878, Governor Lew Wallace issued a proclamation of amnesty, which included the following exception, which stated in part, quote, "Neither shall it be pleaded by any person in bar of conviction under indictment now found or returned for any such crimes or misdemeanors, nor operate the release of any party undergoing pains and penalties consequent upon sentence heretofore had for any crimes or misdemeanors." End quote. Roberts stated correctly that he was ineligible for amnesty due to him being indicted for the killing of Sheriff Brady and Deputy Hindman. The indictments numbered 243 and 244 can be found in Lincoln County Grand Jury Minute Book B, pages 298 and 299 for the April term, 1879. In the Saga of Billy the Kid, Burns states that Billy ignored Wallace's proclamation for amnesty, not because he wasn't eligible, but because he, quote, "had a score of vengeance still to pay off. He had, moreover, acquired the habit of outlawry." End quote. Once again, the versions told by Roberts and Burns aren't even remotely close to being similar. In fact, they are completely opposite, and Roberts' account is backed up by the historical legal records, which we will get more into later on in this chapter. I already discussed the shooting of Brady and Hindman in my previous video, and will post a link below. Roberts' claim that he didn't shoot Brady and Hindman as he was trying to hit Billy Matthews was backed up by Pat Garrett, who told Miguel Antonio Otero that he doubted Billy shot Brady or Hindman, as Billy would be more inclined to shoot Matthews, whom he hated. On July 7, 1926, Otero interviewed Susan McSween Barber, Alexander McSween's widow, at her residence in White Oaks, New Mexico. She told Otero, in regards to the kid's involvement in the killing of Sheriff Brady, quote, "Billy said he tried to get Billy Matthews, who was walking with Brady, and did not even aim at Brady. I think his subsequent conviction for killing Sheriff Brady was based on insufficient evidence and was most unjust." End quote. In the Saga of Billy the Kid, Burns has Billy being the one to kill Brady by shooting him in the head. According to most historical accounts, on February 18, 1879, Billy the Kid and Tom Fired met with Jesse Evans and James Dolan to negotiate a peaceful end to the Lincoln County War. After a brief exchange of insults and threats, the two factions were able to arrive at an amicable agreement. The conditions were as follows: that neither party would kill any member of the other without first giving notice of having withdrawn from the agreement, that all persons who had acted as friends to either party were included in the treaty and were not to be molested, that neither party would appear nor give evidence against the other in any civil or criminal prosecution, that neither officers nor soldiers were to be killed for any act previous to that date, that each group would give the individual members of the other party every aid in their power to resist arrest from civil or criminal warrants, and that if arrested, they would try to secure their release, that any member from either faction failing to carry out this pact should be killed on sight by either party. Following the successful summit, the members of the two factions proceeded to celebrate by making a tour of Lincoln's saloons. During the festivities, the agreement was nearly broken when one of Dolan's cronies, William Campbell, threatened to kill Juan Patron, a former McSween ally. However, Dolan quickly dissuaded him. A short while later, Houston I. Chapman, attorney for Mrs. Susan McSween, arrived from Las Vegas and had just placed his horse in Mrs. McSween's corral. It had been reported that he was suffering from a severe case of neuralgia and had ventured off to a neighbor's to acquire a bread poultice. On his way back, he encountered James Dolan, Jesse Evans, William Campbell, Billy Matthews, Billy the Kid, Tom Fired, and others. Campbell ordered Chapman to halt and placed the muzzle of his weapon against the one-armed lawyer's breast and asked, "Who are you and where are you going?" "My name is Chapman, and I am attending to my business." "Then you dance," replied Campbell. "I do not intend to dance for a drunken coward," Chapman boldly proclaimed. "Am I talking to Mr. Dolan?" "No," interrupted Evans, "but you are talking to a damn good friend of his." At this point, Dolan, who was quite intoxicated, fired his weapon into Chapman. Campbell immediately fired a second bullet into Chapman's defenseless body. Chapman, inflicted with the two fatal wounds, cried out, "My God, I am killed!" He collapsed dead on the main street of Lincoln near the same location Brady and Hindman met their deaths. Chapman's death eerily occurred on the 1-year anniversary of John Tunstall's death. Chapman's body was later doused with alcohol and set ablaze by Dolan. Billy and Fired had tried to leave the scene as the interchange began. However, Evans moved in behind them, withdrew his weapon, and compelled them to stay. It was not until some time later that they were able to quietly slip away. Robert's statement that a peace agreement was made between the surviving factions of the Lincoln County War is further confirmed in Billy the Kid, His Life and Legend by John Tuska, who writes, quote, "On 18 February, the Kid, Tom Fired, Jesse Evans, and James J. Dolan held a peace parley and actually worked out a 6-point agreement among themselves. Having done so, Dolan insisted they all celebrate the action with several rounds of drinks, from which of course the Kid himself abstained." End quote. In the saga of Billy the Kid, Burns doesn't identify the shooters directly, stating only that 2 shots were fired and that James Dolan, Billy Matthews, and William Campbell were charged, and that Dolan and Matthews were acquitted and Campbell was convicted and subsequently escaped from custody. However, in J.B. Billy Matthews' Biography of a Lincoln County Deputy by Elvis Fleming, it states, quote, "The grand jury indicted only Dolan and Campbell for murder and Evans as an accessory, completely passing over Matthews." End quote. Roberts, despite his immense hatred of Matthews, never accused him of being one of the men who shot Chapman, only identifying Campbell and Dolan as the shooters. A small fringe group of neo-historians don't believe that Dolan shot Chapman. They believe that Campbell was the only one to take part in Chapman's murder. However, I believe that Frederick Nolan summed it up best in his book, The Lincoln County War, A Documentary History, when he asked, quote, "Did Dolan shoot Chapman? Every account of the killing agrees that only 2 shots were fired. Dolan claimed he fired into the ground." End quote. However, Nolan adds, quote, "The answer may lie in 2 unargued facts. The first, that Campbell fired only once, and the second, that there were 2 bullets in Chapman's body." End quote. Once again, Roberts is right and Burns is wrong. In the saga of Billy the Kid, Burns identifies Susan McSween's lawyer, who was shot and killed, as George Chapman, when in fact his name was Houston I. Chapman. Roberts doesn't make this mistake. Roberts claimed that he initiated contact with Wallace after hearing he was offered $1,000 if he would come in and testify against Chapman's killers is confirmed in a March 13, 1879 letter from William Bonney to Lew Wallace, which states, quote, "To His Excellency the Governor, General Lew Wallace. Dear Sir, I have heard that you will give $1,000 for my body, which as I can understand, it means alive as a witness. I know it is as a witness against those that murdered Mr. Chapman. If it was so that I could appear at court, I could give the desired information. But I have indictments against me for things that happened in the late Lincoln County War, and I am afraid to give up because my enemies would kill me. The day Mr. Chapman was murdered, I was in Lincoln, at the request of good citizens, to meet Mr. J. Dolan to meet his friends, so as to be able to lay aside our arms and go to work. I was present when Mr. Chapman was murdered, and know who did it, and if it were not for those indictments, I would have made it clear before now. If it is in your power to annul those indictments, I hope you will do so as to give me a chance to explain. Please send me an answer telling me what you can do. You can send answer by bearer. I have no wish to fight anymore. Indeed, I have not raised an arm since your proclamation. As to my character, I refer to any of the citizens, for the majority of them are my friends and have been helping me all they could. I am called Kid Antrim, but Antrim is my stepfather's name. Waiting for an answer, I remain your obedient servant, William H. Bonney." End quote. In the saga of Billy the Kid, Burns doesn't mention Billy reaching out to Wallace by letter after hearing of the $1,000 offer, but rather has the governor visiting Lincoln and sitting with General Hatch, Juan Patron, and several army officers at the Ellis house when the Kid just happened along, riding his horse down Lincoln Street, when Juan Patron yelled out, "Here comes the Kid!" So Walter Noble Burns has Billy first meeting Governor Wallace at the Ellis house. Quote, "Having hitched his horse in front of the Ellis house, he walked quickly up the path to the porch. His rifle in his hand, his 6-shooter at his belt, Governor Wallace rose. 'So you are Billy the Kid,' said the governor to the outlaw." End quote. Whereas Roberts has them meeting at the home of John Squire Wilson, and even is correct in describing its location, stating that it was by the tower, as Wilson's home was located directly across the street from it. This is confirmed by this map. The meeting at Wilson's home is confirmed in High Noon in Lincoln by Robert Utley, who wrote, quote, "On the night of March 17th, in Squire Wilson's rude jacal, next to the courthouse, the distinguished soldier, statesman, and man of letters confronted the smooth-faced young outlaw destined for immortality in the folklore of the West." End quote. Furthermore, in a letter dated March 15, 1879, from Governor Lew Wallace to William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, Wallace gave instructions to the Kid on where to meet him. Wallace stated, quote, "Come to the house of old Squire Wilson, not the lawyer, at 9 o'clock next Monday night, alone. I don't mean his office, but his residence. Following along the foot of the mountains south of town, come in on that side and knock at the east door. I have authority to exempt you from prosecution if you will testify to what you say you know. The object of the meeting at Squire Wilson's is to arrange the matter in a way to make your life safe. To do that, the utmost secrecy is to be used. So come alone. Don't tell anybody, not a living soul, where you are coming or the object. If you could trust Jesse Evans, you can trust me, Lew Wallace." End quote. In the saga of Billy the Kid, Burns doesn't have Wallace offering Billy a pardon in exchange for his testimony. In fact, Burns doesn't have Wallace ask Billy to testify at all, but merely talks to Billy as a father figure, promising him if he lays down his guns, surrenders to arrest, stands trial, and that if he's found guilty, Wallace promises to pardon him. This is in stark contrast to Robert's statements, which are supported not only by the historical record, but also by the letters exchanged between Wallace and the Kid prior to his staged arrest. It is worth noting that the existence of these letters was not commonly known during Robert's lifetime, as they were housed at the Indiana Historical Society's William Henry Smith Memorial Library. The contents of the letters weren't widely publicized until later in the 1950s and early 1960s, well after Robert's death. Robert's account of the agreed-upon location for the stage arrest can be confirmed in a letter from William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, to General Wallace, dated Thursday, March 20th, 1879. It states as follows, quote, "Send Kimball to Gutierrez, just below San Patricio, 1 mile." End quote. Robert's account of he and Fayard being held in the old jail in Lincoln before being transferred to Patrones is confirmed in Billy the Kid, His Life and Legend by John Tuska, who states, quote, "Billy and Tom were first placed in the Lincoln jail. The jail was actually a cellar, the only access being by means of a small door through which a ladder could be lowered. The Kid apparently complained about his accommodations, and Wallace, not yet wanting him and O'Phalliard to be taken to Fort Stanton, had the prisoners transferred to Juan Patron's house." End quote. Robert's claim that Wallace visited him while he was confined at Patron's is confirmed by Fraser Hunt in The Tragic Days of Billy the Kid, who states, quote, "On Sunday, the 3rd day after the arrest, the governor had a long talk with Billy in the back room of the Patron's store. He questioned him at length about the gangs that had been depredating the county and about trails and hideouts and various cattle thieves. There still exists the memorandum that the governor wrote out in his own hand and labeled Statements by the Kid. It bears the date of March 23rd, 1879. End quote. According to Roberts, during his meeting with Governor Wallace at Squire Wilson's house in Lincoln, Wallace promised to appoint his personal lawyer, Judge Ira Leonard, to represent Billy if and when he came to trial, but that he failed to show when his territorial charge was called. This is confirmed in Billy the Kid, A Short and Violent Life by Robert Utley, who writes, quote, "For unknown reasons, Leonard bowed out of the defense of the Kid on the territorial charge of killing Sheriff Brady. Judge Bristol appointed the local partnership of Bale and Fountain." End quote. According to author John Tuska, in his book Billy the Kid, His Life and Legend, he writes, quote, "He didn't bow out, he was dismissed by Judge Bristol, who appointed Fountain and Bale in his place." End quote. Billy appeared before the grand jury during the April 1879 session. The grand jury returned indictment number 280 for murder and accessory to murder against James J. Dolan, William Campbell, and Jesse Evans for the killing of Houston I. Chapman. Campbell, Evans, and Dolan were arrested and held at Fort Stanton to await trial. On March 18, 1879, the 3 men escaped from jail with the help of a guard known as Texas Jack, with only Dolan being recaptured. Evans and Campbell escaped to Texas, while Dolan would later be tried in Socorro County following a motion for change of venue, and was acquitted. Maurice G. Fulton's History of the Lincoln County War confirms Robert's claim that he fulfilled his part of the deal and his betrayal by Rynerson and Bristol. It states, quote, "Billy the Kid kept his promise to Governor Wallace and appeared before the grand jury with his account of the Chapman killing." End quote. Fulton then details how Rynerson, the prosecuting attorney, not only refused to go along with the arrangement that Wallace promised, he planned to fully prosecute Billy and filed a change of venue motion to have Billy tried in Mesilla. According to Roberts, despite this legal setback in Lincoln, he still fulfilled his second part of the deal by testifying at Fort Stanton against Dudley. Billy appeared before the Court of Inquiry on March 25, 1879 at Fort Stanton, New Mexico. The Court of Inquiry had been appointed to investigate Colonel Dudley's possible implication in the death of Alexander McSween. Robert's account is confirmed in Billy the Kid, His Life and Legend by John Tuska, which states, quote, "On May 25, 1879, the Kid was called upon to give evidence at Fort Stanton at the Court of Inquiry, which had been appointed to investigate Colonel Dudley's possible complicity in the death of McSween. His testimony offered several sidelights to the events on the night of July 18, 1878. End quote. Thus concludes Part 1 of the Outlaw Years. And even though we have just touched the surface in examining this part of Billy the Kid's life, it is quite evident that Robert's account and Burns' account are significantly different from one another. It seems that the neo-historians, in their pride and arrogance, have never bothered to verify their claims before repeating them and presenting them as established facts. They say things like, "Oh, we don't need to verify them, because Roberts just made the whole thing up." But they don't know that, and their unsourced claims are not based on facts or evidence. In Part 2, we will continue to examine Roberts and Burns' accounts. We will discuss the killings of Joe Grant and Deputy James Carlisle, as well as the death of Tom Fired. Until next time, stay tuned, and thank you for watching.